The rain came sideways across the courtyard of Ravensmoor, and the woman standing at the side door of the great house was not supposed to be there. She had a basket of cut herbs against her hip, a grey woolen shawl pulled tight over a plain stuff gown the color of wet ash, and a smear of garden soil along one cheek that she had not yet noticed. She was 24 years old. She had walked 3 miles from the village dispensary with a remedy the housekeeper had begged for, and she had been told to use the servants' entrance, and so she had. And now a man came down the dim back corridor toward her with his coat half off his shoulders and the particular weariness of someone who has not slept, and he looked at her, and he stopped. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, somewhere past 35, with a jaw set like something carved and eyes the gray of cold smoke. He had clearly mistaken the corridor for an empty one. He had clearly mistaken her for a maid. And because he had mistaken her for a maid, he said the thing he had been carrying alone for a year, said it low and fast, as though the words had been waiting behind his teeth for someone safe to hear them, someone who did not signify, someone who would forget. He said that he had killed his brother. Not with his hands. With a letter he had refused to send. She did not drop the basket. That was the first thing. The rain went on against the high windows, and a single candle guttered in its sconce, and a man she had never met had just confessed the worst thing he believed about himself to a woman he thought was no one, and she stood very still and held the herbs and did not let her face change. To the house she would have been a servant girl, a nobody from the village, beneath notice. The house would have been wrong. The house had not yet decided what she was, and neither, in that corridor, had he. Her name was Eleanor Hartwell, and she was not a servant. She was the daughter of a country physician lately dead of a fever he had caught from a patient he would not abandon, and she had been raised over his surgery learning Latin and the names of bones, and the difference between a fever that would break and one that would not. She had nursed her father through the last of it. She had buried him in March. By the strict accounting of the world, she now had nothing. No dowry, no settled income, no protector. Only a small rented room above the dispensary, and a knowledge of medicine that the village used freely and paid for sparingly, and a habit her father had given her of looking at frightened people and not flinching. Stay with me through this one, because what happened in that corridor was only the beginning, and the woman holding the basket had already decided something the Duke did not know. She had decided not to run. The man straightened slowly. The confession seemed to reach his own ears a half-second after it left him, and she watched the color leave his face, watched him understand that he had spoken aloud, watched the cold smoke of his eyes go flat with something that was not anger, but was very close to it. "You will forget what you heard," he said. His voice was level. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed, and underneath the level was a thread, pulled very tight. "I heard a man who has not slept," Eleanor said. "That is all I heard." It was not all she had heard. They both knew it. Yet she said it the way her father had taught her to say difficult things. Plainly, and without weight, the way you said a bone. And she saw the tight thread in him ease, by the smallest degree. He looked at the basket. He looked at the soil on her cheek, which she still did not know was there. "Mrs. Penhallow sent for a draught," she said, "for Lord Ashworth's cough. I have it here." And she held out the small stoppered bottle as though the last minute had not occurred, as though he were any tired gentleman and she were any girl with an errand, and after a long moment he took it, and his fingers were cold, and she felt the cold of them at her own bare wrist where the glove had worn through. And neither of them said anything about that either. This was Marcus Thorne, the Duke of Ravensmoor, and the village knew 3 things about him. They knew that he had come north to the old house a year past, and shut himself inside it. They knew that his younger brother, Lord Edmund, had died abroad in some manner no one spoke of plainly. And they knew that he did not ride to hounds, did not answer the invitations that still arrived from the great families of the county, and that the dowager who governed the house in his silence had begun to say, in drawing-rooms, across 3 parishes, that his grace was not himself and wanted managing. The village did not know what Eleanor now knew. The village thought him cold. She had felt his hand shake. He told her to wait while he wrote a reply for the housekeeper, and she waited in the cold back passage, and through a half-open door she saw a room she was not meant to see. A study with the curtains drawn at midday and a portrait turned to face the wall. A young man's portrait by the size and the gilt of the frame, turned around so that only the brown paper backing showed, the way you turn a glass over a candle to put it out. She looked at the reversed portrait for as long as she dared, and then she looked away, because she had been raised to know the difference between seeing and prying, and she let him keep that one private thing. When he returned, he had folded a note and sealed it, and he gave it to her. And then he did something that surprised them both. He asked her name. Servants are not asked their names by dukes. He seemed to realize it as he said it, seemed almost to take it back, and she gave it before he could. "Eleanor Hartwell," she said, "the physician's daughter. He attended your tenants for 20 years. He is lately dead." And she watched him take that in, watched him understand that the woman he had confessed to was not a maid at all, but the daughter of a man his own household had relied upon, a gentlewoman, fallen on hard usage, someone with a name and a history and eyes that had not once looked away from him. And the understanding moved across his carved face like weather over a field. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I took you for one of the house." "I know," said Eleanor. "It is why you spoke." She walked the 3 miles home in the rain with the dowager's diamonds nowhere in her thoughts, and a duke's confession sitting in her chest like a swallowed stone, and she told no one. That was the second thing she had decided. She told no one, not Mrs. Penhallow, who would have made it a story, not the apothecary, who would have made it a profit. She carried it the way she carried other people's secrets, of which a physician's daughter learns a great many, and she went back to her small life of poultices and birthings and old men's chests, and she did not expect to see the Duke of Ravensmore again. The dowager saw to it that she did. Lady Augusta Thorne, the late Duke's widow, Marcus's aunt, by marriage and the self-appointed mistress of Ravensmore, had a cough that winter that would not yield to her own physician's bleeding, and word had reached her of a village girl with her father's gift, and so a footman arrived at the dispensary with a summons phrased as a command. Eleanor went, because she needed the fee, and because she would not let a sick woman suffer for the manner of the asking. She was shown not to the back passage this time, but to a morning room hung in pale silk, where the dowager sat very upright in gray and pearls with a rival's polish to her stillness, and looked at Eleanor's worn mantle and retrimmed bonnet and worked gown and said, to the companion seated beside her, in a voice pitched exactly loud enough to carry, "How quaint. They have sent the herb girl." The herb girl. That was the first voicing of it, in a private aside meant to be overheard, and Eleanor felt it land precisely where it was aimed, and let it land, and did not give the dowager the flinch she was fishing for. She set down her bag. She asked the dowager to breathe, and listened at her back with her ear and a rolled paper the way her father had taught, and heard the wet catch low in the left lung, and told the dowager plainly that the bleeding was making her worse, and the draught she prescribed would make her better, and that she might believe the herb girl or not as she chose. But the choice was the dowager's, and the lung was the dowager's, and Eleanor would be paid the same either way. Lady Augusta was not accustomed to being addressed, so she took the draught. Within 4 days the cough loosened. She did not thank Eleanor. She did, however, send for her again. Oui. And so Eleanor came to be at Ravensmore through that long wet winter 2 and 3 times a week, treating the dowager's lung and then the housekeeper's hands and then a stable boy's broken finger. Moving through the great cold house in her plain gown, while the household watched her with the wary half-respect servants give to someone who is neither one of them nor one of the family. And the Duke watched her, too. She felt it before she saw it. The body knows where a particular person is in a room before the mind admits it is keeping track, and Eleanor's body had begun to keep track of the Duke of Ravensmore, of the particular stillness of him at the end of a corridor, of the way the air seemed to organize itself around his silence. She told herself it was only that she knew his secret. She told herself a great many things that winter. He began to find reasons. A duke does not lack for reasons to be in his own house, but the reasons he found placed him, with a regularity that was not chance, in whatever wing of Ravensmoor Eleanor happened to be working. He would appear at the door of the sick room with some question about his aunt's progress that the steward could have answered. He would be in the library when she passed it, and he would speak to her of nothing, of the weather, of the road, of whether her father had left her his books, and once when she said that her father's books had been sold to pay his burying, the Duke went very quiet and changed the subject. And the next week a crate of medical texts arrived at the dispensary with no note, and Eleanor knew the hand that sent them, and said nothing, and kept them, because she was poor and proud, but not a fool. The thing she could not square was the kindness. The village said cold. The dowager said wanting management. Eleanor saw a man who had confessed to a killing he had committed only with silence, and who turned his dead brother's face to the wall, and who could not say a warm word to save his life, and who sent books to a poor woman without a name attached so that she need not thank him and he need not be thanked. She saw a man issuing the strangest commands. "Sit down," he said to her once, when she had been on her feet since dawn and swayed at the dowager's bedside, and it was not a kindness. It was an order, flat and cold, and a chair was under her before she understood he had pushed it there. "Eat something," he said another time, and bread and cold meat appeared at her elbow on a tray she had not asked for. He never asked how she did. He commanded her to be well as though her wellness were a matter of estate management, and she began to understand that this was the only language of care the man had left to him, that somewhere a tenderness had been walled up so thoroughly that it could only escape disguised as instruction. Here is the thing about a man like that. The world reads the command and calls it cold. The woman who listens hears the protection underneath and does not yet dare to call it anything at all. Eleanor heard it. She did not dare. The witnessing went the other way as well, and she did not know she was being witnessed. There was a child in the house, a girl of 7 named Lucy, the daughter of the Duke's late brother, brought back from abroad after Lord Edmund's death, and lodged in the nursery wing, with a governess who did not like her, and a grief no one had thought to address, because the household was busy with the Duke's grief, and had none to spare for a small girl who had lost her father and her country in the same year. Eleanor found Lucy by accident, crying in a window seat over a broken music box that had been her father's, and Eleanor sat down beside her without being asked, and looked at the music box, and it was only a sprung spring and a bent tooth on the cylinder. The kind of small mechanical hurt a physician's daughter who had mended her father's watch 100 times could put right with a hairpin and patience. She mended it. She sat in the cold nursery with the broken thing in her lap and her head bent and her worn gloves off, and she coaxed the bent tooth straight and reseated the spring. And when the little tune stumbled and then found its feet and played, the child's face did the thing that children's faces do, broke open into pure, uncomplicated joy, and Lucy threw her arms around Eleanor's neck and held on the way a drowning person holds on, and Eleanor held her back. She did not know that the Duke had stopped in the nursery doorway. She did not know that he had come looking for the child himself, with the awkward resolve of a man trying to learn to be something he had not been, and had stopped at the sight of a poor physician's daughter mending his brother's music box for his brother's daughter, and holding the child while she wept. She did not know he stood there a long time. She did not know that when he finally went away, he went without a word, and that he sat in his study with the reversed portrait at his back and put his face in his hands. That was the night the dowager made her second move, and it was a clever one. Lady Augusta had not spent 50 years in the world without learning to read a man's silences, and she had read her nephew's, and she did not like the direction of them. So, at the dinner, she had pressed him to hold the first dinner Ravensmoor had given in a year, with the county families assembled and the candles lit down a table laid for 30. The dowager arranged matters so that the physician's daughter was required to be in the house that evening to attend her. With the guests assembled in the drawing-room before dinner, she sent for Eleanor to bring her drops, and Eleanor came in her plain gray gown into a room full of silk and diamonds, and stood there holding a small bottle while 32 members of the county's first families turned to look at the intrusion. "My herb girl," the dowager said to the room, smiling. "From the village. Quite a curiosity. She fancies herself a physician, if you please. Is that not charming?" And the room laughed, the soft, cruel laugh of people who are certain of their place. And a young lady in ice-blue silk near the fire, Miss Cassandra Vane, the granddaughter of an earl, and the match the dowager had selected for the duke, laughed loudest of all, and said that it was too droll, that next they should have the blacksmith read the sermon. This was the second voicing in public now, before the whole assembled hierarchy, and it was meant to do what the first had not, to make Eleanor small in the one place where smallness could not be borne. And Eleanor felt the heat climb her throat, and felt her own pulse loud in her ears, and felt every eye in the bright room weighing her plain gown and finding it wanting. And she did the only thing she knew how to do, which was to keep her hands still and her chin level, and to cross the room to the dowager and administer the drops, as though the laughter were weather and she a stone in the rain at the door. Though she could not help it, she looked back, and she found the duke's eyes already on her, and they were not cold. They were the eyes of a man watching something he valued be mishandled, and his jaw was set so hard she could see the muscle of it move, and for one suspended moment in that crowded, glittering room, there were only the two of them, the woman in gray at the door, and the man at the head of his own table who had said nothing. And the saying nothing was its own kind of agony, and they both knew it. He came to the dispensary the next day. In the rain again, alone, no servant, no carriage at the door, which the whole street remarked upon the Duke of Ravensmore standing in a village apothecary's front room, dripping on the boards, with his hat in his hand like a supplicant. Eleanor was grinding a powder, and did not stop. "You should not have come," she said. "It will be all over 3 parishes by nightfall." She did not say what it would be all over 3 parishes that he had done. She did not need to. "Let it," he said. And then he seemed to hear himself, and amended it the way he amended everything, into something flatter and safer. "My aunt was unpardonable last night. I have come to say so." "Your aunt was your aunt," said Eleanor, still grinding. "I knew what she was before I came. I am not injured by a thing I expected. You were injured," he said. "I watched it happen." And there it was, the wall come down an inch, the man who could not say a warm word saying, "I watched," saying, "I saw you hurt, and it was not nothing to me," and Eleanor stopped grinding because her hands had begun to shake, and she would not let him see it. And into the silence between them she said the thing she had carried since the corridor, because someone in her life ought to hear a true thing said plainly, and she was tired, and he had come 3 miles in the rain. "The letter you would not send," she said. "Your brother. You told me that first day when you thought I was no one. I never ask. Yet I have thought about it every day since, and I will say one thing about it, and then we need never speak of it again. A man who blames himself that completely for a death, loved the dead man that completely. The two things are the same size. You did not kill your brother. You loved him, and you failed him, and those are different, and only one of them is a sin, and it is the smaller one. He did not move for a long time. The rain ran down the window. Somewhere in the back of the shop, the kettle ticked as it cooled. And then this man who governed an estate and a title and a county's deference said, in a voice that had lost its level at last, that Edmund had written to him from abroad, sick and in debt and ashamed, and had asked to come home, and that Marcus still angry over an old quarrel. The kind of stupid quarrel brothers have and mean to mend and always think there will be time to mend, had written a cold reply, and then not even sent it, had left it on his desk meaning to soften it, and the softening had taken him 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks Edmund had died alone in a foreign town believing his brother would not have him home. The letter was still in the study. Marcus had never been able to burn it. He had turned the portrait to the wall instead. Eleanor came around the counter then. She did not embrace him, that would have been too much, and the wrong thing, but she stood close to him, closer than propriety allowed, close enough that he could have counted her lashes, and she put her bare hand over his cold one where it gripped his hat brim, and she said nothing at all, and he turned his hand under hers and held it. And they stood like that in the empty shop with the rain coming down. Two people who had each lost the person who had loved them best, holding hands over a counter that smelled of camphor and dried lavender. And it was the most that either of them had been touched by another human being in a year, and it was almost unbearable, and neither of them let go. What grew between them, after that, grew in the way of slow things, underground first, then suddenly above the soil. He found more reasons. She invented fewer excuses to refuse them. The dowager's lung was long since healed, but the dowager kept her on, for reasons of her own that Eleanor was not fool enough to misread, and so the visits continued, and in the continuing, the two of them learned each other. She learned that he read Greek for pleasure, and could not carry a tune, and had a temper he kept on a chain, so short it had nearly strangled him. He learned that she laughed rarely and fully when she did, that she was vain about exactly one thing, her competence, and merciless about her own errors, and that she had not wept for her father where anyone could see her. Not once. He found her one evening in the library, where she had gone to return a book, standing before the fire with her arms wrapped around herself. And he did not ask what was wrong, he never asked. He crossed the room and he said, "Come here," in that flat, commanding voice. And she came, and he put his arms around her. And she wept at last for the man who had taught her to set bones, wept into a duke's coat in a candlelit library, with the books rising to the ceiling all around them, and he held her and said nothing, and his hand moved once over her hair, and that was all, and it was everything. It was after that night that the wanting changed its nature. She had been aware of him as one is aware of a fire across a room, grateful for the warmth and careful of the burn. Now the awareness had a different weight to it. She found that she watched his hands when he turned the pages of a book. She found that when he stood close to give her some flat command, her breath did something disobedient, and her skin remembered exactly where his hand had rested over hers in the shop. She found lying awake in her cold room above the dispensary that she wanted, plainly and without disguise, a thing she had no business wanting, the regard of a man whose rank made the wanting absurd. And she lay in the dark, and named it to herself because she had been raised to name things truly. She wanted him, not his house, not his name, not the safety either, could buy him. The cold man with the walled-up tenderness who could only say care in the shape of an order, and the wanting frightened her more than poverty ever had. Because poverty she knew how to survive. He spoke it before she did. He was braver than she gave him credit for, or perhaps only more desperate, a man who had let one silence kill the thing he loved, and had sworn somewhere in himself never to be killed by his own silence twice. They were in the long gallery, alone, which was itself a transgression, the winter light coming gray through the high windows and the portraits of dead thorns looking down. And he stopped her with a hand that did not quite touch her arm, hovered an inch from it, and he said her name. Eleanor just that. The first time he had used it. Not Miss Hartwell, not the herb girl, her own name in his low voice as though it were a word in a language he was only learning to speak, and she turned, and his hand was still there, an inch from her, not arriving, and his face was open in a way she had not seen it, the carved stillness gone soft and uncertain and young. "I have no right to say this to you," he said. "Every reason I have is a reason against it. My aunt has chosen me a wife with £60,000 and an earl for a grandfather. The county expects it. My own sense tells me a duke does not marry a physician's daughter who comes to the house by the back door. I know all of it. I have argued every point of it to myself 100 times. He stopped. His hand still hovered. "And it changes nothing. I want no one in this house but you. I have wanted no one but you since the day you held my brother's music box and did not know I was watching. Tell me to be silent, and I will be. And we need never speak of it. I will not let another silence cost me the thing I cannot replace." So I am speaking. God help us both, I am speaking. Eleanor's whole body had gone. Still the way A held breath is still. His hand was an inch from her arm. The whole weight of the world said to step back, to be sensible, to remember her place and his, and the 60,000 pounds and the Earl, and she stood at the very edge of the thing. The way you stand at the edge of cold water, knowing that once you are in, you cannot be dry again. And she understood that this was the moment. That what came next could not be unmade. And she was a physician's daughter, and a coward about nothing except this. And she closed the inch herself. She put her arm into his hovering hand. She felt his fingers close. And she said, "Then do not be silent. I am tired of being the only one who hears the true things." He did not kiss her. Not then. He brought her gloved hand up and pressed his mouth to the worn knuckles of it, the place where the leather had gone thin, and held it there. She felt the warmth of his breath through the thin glove, and it was chaster than a great many things and more devastating than any of them. And the dead thorns looked down, and the gray light held them. And for one long suspended moment, two people who had each thought their lives were over, stood at the beginning of something neither had dared to expect. The dowager found out within the week, because dowagers always do. And the dowager, who loved her nephew in the hard, clutching way of a woman whose entire self was built upon the order he was about to overturn, did the most dangerous thing she could do. She did not rage. She acted. She let it be known to Miss Vane's family that an understanding existed between Cassandra and the Duke, which was a lie. But a lie a dowager duchess can make true if she moves quickly. And she set the date of a betrothal dinner, and she sent the announcement to be printed. And she did all of it in 3 days while the Duke was away at the assizes on the county's business, so that he should return to find himself, by every appearance the world could see, an engaged man, and the physician's daughter exposed as a schemer who had reached above herself for a man already promised. And to make certain Eleanor understood her defeat, Lady Augusta sent for her one last time, not to the morning room now, to the great drawing room where Miss Vane sat in triumph and a few chosen witnesses had been gathered for the purpose, and there, before them all, the dowager delivered the third voicing, and it was the cruelest, because it was delivered as a kindness. "I have brought you here, Herb girl," she said, "to spare you a public humiliation. There is to be a betrothal. My nephew is to marry Miss Vane. Whatever foolishness you have imagined between yourself and his grace ends today. You will not come to this house again. A girl of your station who forgets herself becomes a girl with no character at all, and a girl with no character does not eat. Do you understand me? You came here the herb girl. You will leave here the herb girl. That is all you were ever going to be. The herb girl, the third time in the great arena itself, before the witnesses, with the announcement already at the printer's and the man himself absent and unable to speak. And this was the dark moment, and it landed with its full weight. Because the dowager had not merely insulted her, she had built a wall of fact around her. A betrothal printed and dated and witnessed, and against printed fact. What was a poor woman's word? What was a duke's hovering hand in an empty gallery that no one had seen? Eleanor stood in the great drawing-room and felt the floor of her brief, impossible hope give way beneath her, and she did not weep, and she did not beg, and she did not give the gathered women the collapse they had assembled to enjoy. She said, "I understand you, my lady." And she gathered her worn mantle, and she walked out of Ravensmoor through the front door this time, not the back, the only small defiance left to her, and she walked the 3 miles home in the cold without feeling it. And she packed her father's medical texts into the crate they had come in, because she could not stay in a parish where she would have to watch the carriage go by to a wedding, and she meant to be gone before the Duke returned. She had not reckoned on the child. Or rather, she had thought of Lucy with a grief that nearly undid her, but she had not reckoned on what the child would do, because she had made the same mistake the whole house made of thinking a 7-year-old does not see. Lucy saw everything. Lucy had seen the herb girl mend her father's music box, and hold her while she cried. Lucy had seen her uncle, who never softened to anyone, soften to the herb girl. And Lucy, when she understood that the herb girl was being sent away, and a cold lady in blue was to live at Ravensmoor instead, did the thing that children do, which adults have forgotten how to do. She told the truth to the only authority she trusted, which was not her grandmother and not the governess, but the steward, old Mr. Brant, who had served 3 dukes and had dandled Lucy's father on his knee. And Lucy told Mr. Duke Brant that her grandmother was telling lies, and her uncle loved the herb girl and everyone was being wicked, and Mr. Mad. Brant, who had watched the dowager govern in the Duke's grief, and had said nothing because it was not his place, found that it was suddenly entirely his place. He sent a rider to the assizes that night. The Duke came back at dawn. He came back having ridden through the dark with a betrothal announcement he had never sanctioned waiting for him, and a woman he loved already half-packed, to vanish, and he did not go to his aunt, and he did not go to Miss Vane. He came to the dispensary as the village was waking, on a horse ridden nearly to its knees, and he hammered on the door. And when Eleanor opened it with the crate of books behind her, and her face composed for departure, he looked at the crate, and he looked at her, and he understood everything in a moment, and the thing that came into his face was not the cold, and was not even the grief. It was fear, plain mortal fear. The fear of a man watching the second great loss of his life walk toward the door. "Do not go," he said. It was an order. Of course it was an order. It was the only way he knew, and Eleanor even then, even with her heart breaking, almost smiled at it. "There is an announcement," she said. "It is printed. The county believes it. Your aunt has made it true, the only way such things are made true. I will not be the woman who is talked about in 3 parishes as the schemer who came in by the back door. I have nothing in this world but my character. My lord and I will not spend it on a fight I cannot win. Then we will win it where everyone can see," he said. She did not understand him. He told her to come to the house. Not by the back door. He sent his own carriage for her, in daylight, with the ducal arms on the panel, so that the whole street should see the physician's daughter handed into the Duke of Ravensmore's carriage by the Duke's own hand, and he brought her to Ravensmore on the very evening the dowager had set for the betrothal dinner. When the county families were once again assembled, when Miss Vane sat at the place of honor, and the announcement was the talk of the table, and the dowager presided in her gray and pearls, believing the matter settled and the herb girl gone for good. The doors of the great drawing-room opened, and the Duke walked in with Eleanor on his arm, in the same plain gray gown, soil long since washed from her cheek, her chin level, and the room went silent the way a struck bell goes silent when you close your hand around it. The dowager rose. "Marcus," she said, "what is the meaning of this?" Her voice was still polished. Eleanor, who had listened at so many chests, heard the catch low in it, the first crack. He did not cross the room in a fury. He did exactly as much as was needed, and not 1 degree more. He led Eleanor to the center of the room, into the full light of the great chandelier, where the whole county could see her. And he turned to face them all, his aunt and Miss Vane and the assembled first families who had laughed at the herb girl, and he said in the level voice that had always hidden everything and now hid nothing, 6 words. "This is the woman I marry." He let the silence hold after it. He did not explain, did not justify, did not match his aunt's cruelty with cruelty of his own, did not say 1 word against Miss Vane, who had, after all, been used by the dowager as much as anyone. He simply stood with Eleanor's hand on his arm, in the light where everyone could see, and let the fact of it settle over the room the way his aunt had tried to let the printed lie settle, except that this was not a lie, and the difference was visible on his face, and the county saw it. They saw the Duke of Ravensmore, who had not smiled in a year, look at a woman in a worn gray gown as though she were the only warm thing in a cold house, and the county, which had laughed because the dowager laughed, began in the way of crowds to feel the wind change. Old Mr. Brant at the door said quietly that the betrothal announcement had gone out without his Grace's seal or signature, and that he had taken the liberty of sending to the printer to have it withdrawn, and that the solicitor would confirm no contract existed. It was the procedural seal on the thing The closing of the door the dowager had tried to force, and it was said without triumph, an old servant simply stating a fact, and it could not be undone. The dowager looked at her nephew, and she looked at the woman on his arm, and Eleanor watched the calculation run behind the old woman's eyes, watched her measure the room and find it already lost, watched 50 years of certainty meet the one case her certainty had never been built to hold. Lady Augusta did not fragment into shouting. She was too well made for that. Her hand, which had held its fan at a measured height through every public moment of her long life, lowered the fan to her lap and did not raise it again, and her face changed, and what was in it at the last was not rage, but something nearer to recognition. The dreadful, private recognition of a person who has spent her strength defending a wall and looks up to find the wall was never the thing that mattered. "I see," she said. "Only that." And she sat down. And Miss Vane, who was not cruel, only young and told all her life that she was the correct choice, looked from the Duke to Eleanor and understood that she had been spared something rather than denied it, and she inclined her head to Eleanor, the smallest courtesy, the first of the county to offer one, and the rest followed as the rest always follow. They were married in the spring, in the small church at the edge of the Ravensmore land, not the great cathedral the dowager would have demanded, with the tenants in the pews her father had doctored for 20 years, and the village apothecary weeping openly, and Lucy strewing the path with the first violets of the year. The dowager attended. She had in the weeks between done a thing Eleanor had not expected, which was to come to the dispensary herself, alone, and stand in the front room where her nephew had once dripped rain on the boards, and say stiffly with great difficulty that she had been wrong, and that the wrongness had cost her more than she had known she had to lose, and that she hoped, if it was not too late, to know her nephew's wife. Eleanor, who had been raised to mend things, mended that too. It is the smaller sin, she had told the Duke once, of loving and failing. The dowager had loved her order and failed her nephew. It was the smaller sin. Eleanor forgave it and meant it, and the two women became in time something neither would have predicted. Not friends exactly, but allies, two competent women running between them a house that had been too long governed by grief. If Eleanor's story has moved you, stay a moment longer for its close, because the best part of it was not the great drawing room. The best part came after on an evening. The following winter, with the snow falling soft and steady past the high windows of the library where she had once wept into his coat, Eleanor sat by the fire with Lucy asleep against her side, the child grown easy and loud and happy in a house that had learned again how to hold a child. Marcus sat across from her with a Greek book he was not reading, watching his wife and his brother's daughter in the firelight, and on the table between them stood the portrait of Edmund, turned at last to face the room, because Eleanor had asked him gently one evening whether his brother might not prefer to see the house grow warm again than to stare forever at the wall, and he had turned it himself, and wept and slept that night for the first time without the dream. And on the mantel, ticking softly, was Lucy's music box, mended, playing its small tune to no one, the bent tooth straight, the sprung spring reseated, the same little mechanism a physician's daughter had once put right with a hairpin, and patience in a cold nursery while a grieving man watched from a doorway and began, without knowing it, to come back to life. The snow came down. The fire held, and the herd girl who the great house had once decided was no one at all sat warm at the center of it, exactly where she belonged. Thank you for staying to the end of it. If there was a moment in Eleanor's story that stayed with you, I would be glad to know which one.